the laws of Chanukah. Book we're going to use is Pnei Halacha by Rabbi Melamed. Book, a volume called Zmanim, which means times, special times. As you can see, the English says laws of minor holidays and annual observances, including the laws of Rosh Chodesh, Shvat, Omer, Yom Ha'atzmaut, fast days, 3 weeks, Chanukah and Purim. So we're going to go to the section on Chanukah and have a look. It starts on chapter 11, which talks about the history of Chanukah, the background to Chanukah, what the story is and what it's about, a little bit about the basic laws. Chapter 12 is almost entirely about lighting the Chanukah candles and how you light them and what the different customs. And chapter 13 is when and where to light the Chanukah candles. So basically we have 2 chapters about Chanukah candles, 1 chapter about the rest. So with your permission, let's begin with the beginning. Chapter 11 on Chanukah, 3 chapters. We've got a few days. I should be able to cover that. And since it is in English, we're going to give you some time to learn on your own. And then we'll take it up, we'll discuss it, we'll take questions, and we'll try to make sure we understood properly. So with your permission, go for it. I suggest that we do now is chapter 11 is a full 20 pages. I'd say let's do about 10 pages now, and then we'll take a break. So please go up until page 233. Okay, it's 12 pages. We'll study that, and then in about 10 minutes, we'll discuss the first 10 pages. Okay, and then we'll go to the second 10 pages. Absolutely. All right. Page 221. Good morning, Jake. Page 221 until 233.
Are we just reading?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want, write down notes, write down questions. If you don't have the actual book on you, I think Moshe is watching us online. You can get it online. You look for Pnei Halacha. There's actually an app as well, or they have on their website. You can the entire book is for free online, and also downloadable as an app. We're looking for the section called Zmanim, which talks about the laws of Chanukah. We're ready, page 221 to 233. Good morning.
Who is this?
Morning.
This is in Age of Judah.
I think we can stop at 229.
Yeah.
And if you're including the footnotes. Chapter 11. Okay, up to page 229. Everybody got it? There's quite a lot of history here, but it's fascinating stuff. So let's start at the beginning, page 221. We're going to come back to this, but this is like in the Talmud, this is the introduction to Chanukah. When the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils. This is what we teach all the children. This is the simple, basic story. There was only one cruse of oil that was marked with the seal of the high priest, which contained sufficient for one day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was performed, and they lit the menorah for 8 days. Another year, it sounds like this Chanukah was established subsequently to this. These days, these 8 days, were designated a holiday with the recitation of Hallel and Thanksgiving. So praise and thanksgiving. This is a holiday for praise and thanksgiving. What for? For the miracle of the Hasmoneans purifying the temple, and the miracle of the oil in the lamps of the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, lasting for 8 days. That's all it says in the temple. What's missing? All the other stuff that you read about. The infighting, the political and geopolitical machinations, and the Greek Empire and the Hasmonean Kingdom, and the ups and downs, and then eventually the connection to the Roman Empire. All that not mentioned at all in the Talmud. Of course, it's mentioned in other sources. We know this from other sources. One of the sources, which talks about all the different battles, not just about the miracle of the oil, is famously called the Book of the Maccabees. The Book of the Maccabees is not part of the Tanakh. It's not in the Hebrew Bible that the Judaism believes in. Our tradition tells us that Ezra and his cohorts, the men of the Great Assembly in the Second Temple period, they collated the Bible, and they only included in the Bible what was written with divine spirit, and is supposed to stay forever. It has staying power. It has a lasting message for all generations. So, of course, this story, the story of Chanukah, happened after all that. Right? It's towards the end of the Second Temple period, and so the Book of the Maccabees is not included in the Tanakh. Also because the book of the Maccabees, maybe the sages determined that it was not written with Ruach HaKodesh, and it's not on the same level. And so it becomes part of what's called in Hebrew the Sfarim HaChitzonim, the external books which shouldn't make it into the Tanakh. A word in English for that?
The Apocrypha.
The Apocrypha. Apocrypha is well known, primarily among Christians, because in the Christian Bible, famously they have something called the Old Testament, which is pretty much equivalent to what we call the Tanakh, and the New Testament. And in addition, in the volume which has the Old Testament and the New Testament, they always print them together, or mostly, they have in between or at the back, they have another section called the Apocrypha, which is a collection of books from the Second Temple period, including the Book of the Maccabees. There's two books. Book 1, Maccabees 1, Maccabees 2. Other people call it Chashmonaim 1 and Chashmonaim 2. We talked about the word Chashmona yesterday. In any case, so those are, we're not quite sure. We don't have the original Hebrew. Maybe it was written in Greek first. And then what we have is a translation from the Greek. Whatever it is, we do have a lot of information also from external sources. Josephus writes a lot about, of course, the Roman Empire, as he was part of that, but also beforehand, the history of what happened to the Jews before the Romans took over the land of Israel. And so we do have quite a detailed story. If you got to see the footnotes, quite a detailed story. But we're going to come back to the candles and the miracle of the oil and how we celebrate it. The rabbis instituted that every year we should celebrate with the lighting the candles to celebrate the miracles. But just to give you a better understanding of the history of the period, I really like what Rav Melamed did here. And it's going to be very important for really appreciating the messages of Chanukah and for understanding the oral Torah at the same time that all this is what we're going to read about next soon. We're going to read about that after I fill in and sort of discuss what we just read on the previous 10 pages. The next 10 pages discuss what the rabbis tell us to take from this entire period, and that is the development of the oral law, the development of the Torah, which really came into its own as a structure, as a framework that is a religion that has staying power even after the temple was destroyed. Basically, Judaism as we know it today was developed during that period, the period of the Hasmonean rule, and afterwards, even after the destruction of the temple, the period we call it the period of Chazal. Our sages of blessed memory, the Tanaim and the Amorim, they started around year 0, which is while the temple was still there. So we're still under officially, it was sort of Jewish reign. Right? King Herod was the king up until year 4. And after him, there was some other Rome, but Herod was sort of Jewish. So, as you saw in the last footnote, the Rambam considers, in the beginning of Hilchot Chanukah, the Rambam also has a discussion of the history of the period, and he says one of the things we celebrate on Chanukah, besides the oil, of course, we're going to get back to the oil and the miracle, lasted for 8 days. Besides that, we're celebrating that for 200 years, the Rambam considers the entire Hasmonean period to be Jewish reign. There was sovereignty returned to the Jewish people after the heyday of King David and Solomon, and the split of the two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel, kingdom of Judah, which was all destroyed in the first temple. At the end of the first temple, in the second temple period, we came back. We built the Jerusalem. We built the Beit HaMikdash. Didn't really have political independence until the some measure of independence came when we overthrew the Seleucid Greeks and created some kind of sovereignty. And that sovereignty was not absolute. It had ups and downs. But the Rambam writes that what's part of what we celebrate on Hanukkah is that we had Jewish sovereignty again for more than 200 years, he says. More than 200 years, that's got to include all these ups and downs. That's got to include the Jewish kings, which were Hellenists, the Jewish kings, which were, just vassal kings of the Roman Empire, like Herod's father, Antipater. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in history. But so just the Rambam mentions that this political sovereignty, as weak or as unique as it was, it has halachic significance. And this goes back to why we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut nowadays. You know, as angry as you can be against the government, this kind, that kind, At the end of the day, it's a Jewish government. And it's no worse, I hope, no worse than the Hellenists who were controlling the temple. We talk about, oh no, the chief rabbi, the chief rabbinate has very little control, has very little power, and so weak. It's stronger than, it's a better situation than when we had the Hellenists running the temple, and they were, not following the rabbis at all. So this really teaches us to appreciate that it's a mitzvah in the Torah that we should control the land. The Jewish people should have sovereignty, and this is part of what we celebrate on Chanukah. So all this history is not just for naught. It's actually sort of, you could say, it's an expansion of understanding why the Rambam mentions that part of what we celebrate on Chanukah is that Jewish reign returned for over 200 years. So let's go back now and review what he says. Look at page 221. He quotes a source. He doesn't quote the source I mentioned, the book of the Maccabees. The book of the Maccabees talks about the Chanukah miracle, and it talks about some of the wars and some of the different leaders, which are mentioned in the footnotes. But the one text which he does quote here is Megillat Ta'anit. What is Megillat Ta'anit, and where can you find it?
In Masechet Ta'anit?
No, it's not in Masechet Ta'anit, and it's not in the Tanakh, and it's not in the Apocrypha.
Mishnah?
It's not in the Mishnah. It's pretty amazing. Just like I said, the Tanakh has some books which are outside of the Tanakh that didn't make it in, that are sort of external. We call them the Sfarim Chitzunim, the outside books, or the Apocrypha, they're called in some traditions. Whatever it is, there's material which is not inside the Tanakh. Similarly, we have a situation when it comes to the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud. Mishnah and the Talmud, we have 63 Masechtot, 6 orders of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put together, and the Talmud that expands upon it. And then there's other material. There's other material too, from that didn't make it in to the Shas. The Shas is called Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, the 6 orders of the Mishnah. And oftentimes they're called the small Masechtot.
Mm-hmm.
Small Masechtot. They're not one of the 63 major ones which appear in as part of the Talmud and the Mishnah, but they anybody have heard of them before? And we can give you an example of one of the small Masechtot, their names. Yeah.
Megillat Ta'anit.
Megillat Ta'anit, thank you. Good. Okay, that's it's not quite. You can see it has a different moniker. It's not called a Masechet.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is something called Masechet Ta'anit, so it's called a Megillah, and it's actually, but where you can find it is usually together with the other Masechtot. It's of an earlier time. I guess it's closer in parallel to the book of the Maccabees than it is to the Masechtot Ktanot. The small Masechtot, there's a Masechet Tzitzit and Tfilin and Gerim and Sefer Torah and Smachot, meaning it's about the laws of mourning. Whereas there are later collections of Amoraic times of material about a certain topic. So similar to that, there's Megillat Ta'anit, which is essentially Talmudic in nature, and it's a unique, even among those extra books, it's unique because essentially what it is, as he says here, it's a list. It's a list of holidays from the Second Temple time. Now, the reason why you don't know that is because if you see in the footnote, many holidays are mentioned, even in the text on page 222. Ever heard of Nicanor Day? Ever heard of the 14th of Sivan being a holiday? 22nd of Elul? 23rd of Mar Cheshvan? We don't celebrate these holidays anymore. It's a whole list, and in the footnote it goes on, and basically it goes through all these holidays which the Jews at the time of the Second Temple instituted. Again, a little bit of a hint towards Yom HaAtzmaut, the concept of instituting a festival to celebrate events of your day. This is exactly what they did in the Second Temple period. Of course, there's a bigger question nowadays. Do we have the authority? We don't have the sages of the same stature, but we'll leave that for Yom HaAtzmaut. In terms of the holidays, this was what they did, and that the Megillat Ta'anit essentially is a list. It's a list of all these days, and on all these days, this is really the way the Megillat Ta'anit begins. It says, on all these days, you're not allowed to eulogize
or fast,
and you're not allowed to fast. That's the mark of a holiday. We really know how to party. No fasting. It's the basic, and no eulogizing. And all these days, you can see very significant things, different parts of the fight against the Greek army. For example, Nicanor Dori, we killed their commander, Nicanor. And, we conquered Caesarea. We got rid of a brothel near the temple. We conquered Samaria. Even more in the footnote, you can see that on the 24th of Av, the Hasmoneans reinstated Torah law as the official legal system instead of Greek law. Wow, that's definitely something worth celebrating. The Accra fortress, big fight over that, discussed in the book of the Maccabees. Getting rid of the idolatrous images. Each of all these days were really holidays, and even the holiday that we're going to talk about soon about King Yanai being killed, and King Herod actually. Herod, we'll get to him in a few minutes. He was towards the end of the Hasmonean rule, towards the end of the Second Temple period. Very complicated fellow. I'll be happy to take you for a tour of his gravesite and his master palace, because it's right across from my home, right near where I live, Herodian. Yes, Jacob.
On page 222, it mentions that we insert like Al Hanasim into our prayers. Where would that be located in the Siddur?
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that for sure. There's
Okay.
more rules about that. What happens if you forget it? It's in the Modim section, the section of Thanksgiving, which is towards the end of the Amidah. In the Amidah, we insert into the Amidah. There's a section, all 8 days of Chanukah, Shachris Mincha Maariv, and Birkat HaMazon. You add in the Al Hanisi. Okay?
Thank you.
No problem. Yes, see, we should get to some practical halacha. I understand your question, but the background is important. I think it's important.
I was curious.
It's all right. Now, all these days we don't celebrate because the sages abolished them. They said, well, what's the point of celebrating that we've defeated the Greeks when the Romans came and destroyed the temple, and now we have nothing left? And the Greeks, that's right. So the whole thing is ancient history. But they only said, out of those days, one of the 2 days of those days listed are the holidays of Chanukah and Purim. Those are the only ones that remain, holiday of Chanukah and Purim. So these essentially are symbolic of the entire list, of the entire gamut. But of course, it begs the question, why do these stay and the other ones? What makes Chanukah an eternal festival and not just, a temporary celebration of the Hasmonean successes? What's unique about the Chanukah miracle, also Purim? Why is Purim celebrated when, this already goes back to the Persian era? Persians are long gone. Persians were conquered by Alexander the Great. What year? It's easy to remember. 333 minus 333. It's very easy. Alexander the Great came to the land of Israel. 333. Okay, it's just a review. So that's what we're gonna talk about. The remainder of the time, we're gonna talk about what's so special about Hanukkah that does demand us to pay attention to it and to keep it, to keep the laws every year, as opposed to all those other historical festivals which fell by the way. So when we get to Purim, we'll talk about Purim. But just giving you the background. So now a little bit more. The Greek Empire. Alexander the Great, amazing. Tutored by Aristotle himself. You might have heard of him. And Alexander, there's legends about
Macedonian. Macedon.
That's right. There's legends about how he was like the greatest warrior in the history of the world.
And also Genghis Khan.
Okay.
Used to eat his people.
He was a messed up guy.
And there's legends that Alexander the Great could fly.
Well, I don't think he could do that.
Why do they have legends about him flying?
Because he just swept across the known world at
That's
speed that no one else had ever
Exactly. It conquered like almost the entire world, the entire Middle East, and more, all the way to India within 3 years. It was unheard of. And he was a young man. And his young man died at a young age. What does it say here how old he was when he died? But he died pretty young. 10 years after he conquered Israel, he died. When he died, he had 3 generals, 3 commanders. And one of them was called Ptolemy, with the silent P.
I know the others.
The other one is called Seleucus. And the third one was Antigonus. So the two first guys ganged up and beat down Antigonus. So Antigonus lost, and so what was left is two. The truth is, there is, I think there was a third commander, I forget, and he remained in control of Greece with Rome, but in terms of the Middle East, it got divided up between Ptolemy and Seleucus. And Ptolemy was based in Egypt, conquered Egypt, and at first, that included Israel was included with the Egyptian part of the Greek Empire, and Seleucus, of course, had the Babylon, Syria, what we call today, Iraq, and to the east. So that lasted for about 160 years, I think he says here. 150 years, anyways, and Ptolemy, the Egyptian Greek emperor, he took the soft approach. Good cop, bad cop. They were both Greek Hellenizers, but he took the softer approach. He allowed the Jews to keep their temple. He allowed them to keep their practice, but he, of course, built, Greek culture, gymnasiums, and sports, and at first, the Talmud tells a story about, which is telling about this relationship between the Jewish people and the Greek Empire. It says that when Alexander the Great conquered the land of Israel in what year? 333. It's pretty easy to remember.
BCE.
He came to, I think it was to Lod. He came to Lod. He came, to the port. Came down with his, troops and his horses. And the leader at the time, the Jewish leader at the time, was Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik is famously known as the remnant of the last ones of
BC.
excellent. Very good, Russell.
What is that?
The man of the Great Assembly is the leadership of the Jewish people in the Second Temple period. There was something called the Great Assembly. How many members did it have?
120.
120.
That I know.
Very good. So the modern day Knesset is patterned after that. Of course, it's totally inappropriate number for the amount of citizens today in the land of Israel, but that's okay. We'll get over it.
Should we go ahead and buy it? It's just here.
Some people say we should have more members of parliament to represent more, and some people say we have enough trouble with the ones we have.
Apparently, there have been studies that have shown Israel should have around 375.
Right.
Because it
In
means
terms of the population, yeah.
Yeah, because each person has so much responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous, but whatever. Anyways, Shimon HaTzadik, Simon the Great, he was the high priest, and he was a remnant of those men of the Great Assembly, basically Jewish leadership. What he did, the Talmud tells the story that he put on the Kohen Gadol's clothes, and went from Jerusalem, from the temple, out with a convoy to greet Alexander the Great. And the Talmud tells a story that when Alexander the Great saw him from a distance, he got off his horse and he bowed down to Shimon HaTzadik. This is the great warrior that conquered the entire world. What's this? All of his soldiers and ministers said, "What's going on here? What's the deal?" He said to them as follows: "You should know that in all my battles, the night before, I have a dream, and in the dream I see this image of a man that promises me success, and it's him." And so they had a nice conversation, and I think that influenced, Ptolemy and his approach to being soft on the Jews. They let the temple stand. This is, and the truth is, we've all heard of the Jewish philosophers our sages and a lot of their teachings, and there's similarities between them and some of the Greek teachings. And there's even laws in the Mishnah which say that if you're going to write a Sefer Torah, you can write it in Greek.
So Judaism it's permanently Hellenized. There's no unhellenizing it.
I didn't say anything like that whatsoever. So I'll continue maybe from the continuing discussion. You'll understand a little bit. Basically, we see that there was some kind of a relationship built between the Greek culture and the Jewish sages and our Torah culture. And obviously, it's a messy business. We talked about the Hellenists, and eventually they were drawn more to the Greek culture and less to were drawn away from the Jewish culture. But for the first 150 years or so, there was actually some kind of healthy cross-pollination between the different cultures. And there's some, people say that that goes back to the original pasuk in the Torah. We actually studied a little bit of the charts. Remember the charts I showed you about how the world after the flood? After the flood, Noah had 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
What was his 3 children's name?
Shem,
Ham, and Yefet. And in the blessing, really it's the curse of Ham.
You said that Yefet is Greek.
That's it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
One of his children, his name is Yavan.
I wrote it down.
Excellent. So the pasuk says, Yafte Lukim Yefet, right? That Noah was blessing his son Yefet. V'yishkon be'ohlei Shem, and he will dwell in the tents of Shem. Shem, of course, being the forerunner of the Jewish people, Semites, if you will, from Shem. Right. So the Torah seems to be suggesting that there is a way for the Greek culture, the beauty, Yofi is beauty. The name Yefet comes from the word beauty. So the beauty, and Greek, of course, was known for their aesthetics, the culture of aesthetics, both in sports and the human body, and in terms of statues, and also aesthetics is a style of philosophy that can dwell within the tents of Shem. There's a way to incorporate the best of the ideas and values in the Greek culture, together with, of course, the Jewish values and Shem's traditions, which perhaps are passed down from prophecy, and that's perhaps some kind of ideal. We all know that it's very hard to implement, and ultimately it led to a clash. That's what we're going to be celebrating soon, that we overcome. And but if we weren't, it's ironic. Rav Melamed here writes that it's ironic that God made it so that we had to rebel. He made it that the Ptolemaic, softer Greek emperor lost power over the land of Israel where the Jews were. And the Seleucid Greeks, the Greeks from Syria, they took over with their kings, famously Antiochus, and his son was also Antiochus Epiphanes. They took over and they said no more kid gloves,
Mr. Nice Guy.
and no more Mr. Nice Guy, and they actually forced us to, they persecuted us religiously. So you're not allowed to keep the mitzvot. We talked about it yesterday, and the temple service, of course, they defiled. And so because of that, Rabbi Melamed says the Jews, even though many of them were dealing with this cross culture and becoming very close to the Hellenistic values, that sort of pushed them against the wall and made them rebel, and that kept up their Judaism. So almost like God making sure that the hardship came, the persecution came, so that we don't lose our identity totally, because we really were in danger of being subsumed by that culture, even though ideally we would like to make some kind of a combination, some kind of a healthy fruitful connection, it's very complicated, and we were about to lose. And only because we were pushed to the wall that to totally, bow down to the idols, and you have to give up your religion. So then they say the pintel yid, right, the little Jew that's inside of us, that little spark of Judaism, was not willing. We were not willing to give that up, and that forced us to rebel. And once we're rebelling, so then also. There was some fighting inside the Jewish people, some culture war between the Hellenists and the more traditional, the what we call them now today, the rabbis, I guess you could say that. And so there was infighting within the Jewish people. Ultimately, as we know, the rabbis won out and the Hellenists went the way of history. And we celebrate Chanukah to celebrate the success of Judaism surviving and then flourishing, as we're going to see in the next 10 pages. I'll stop for a minute, take some questions, and then we'll go on. Yes, Rena.
In the time of Antiochus,
Mhm.
they cannot read the Torah. So was that time they start to read the Haftarah?
I don't know. I don't know.
Either that
It's
or
a
the
good
Romans.
question. I don't know.
You want one of those empires. The Persians,
Other questions?
that's
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know when the Haftarah started.
If the Greeks wanted to stop the Jewish spirit, why did they only defile the temple and not destroy it like in the past?
It's an interesting question. They turned it into a temple for idolatry at first.
End of the day, though, I mean, anyone who was there before they came in, or had a grandparent or even a parent who was there before they knows what the temple's actually.
That they would.
Yeah,
They're probably kicking themselves now, but at the time they didn't feel the need. I know that in the Roman period afterwards, Josephus makes a claim that Titus didn't want to destroy the temple because it was such a beautiful building. Of course, that's already a different temple. That's the second temple version 2. That's new and improved by Herod. Herod made the building much more grander. They said it was the most beautiful building in the world.
Right.
Architecture.
This one isn't that pretty.
This one is not as that. So, why they didn't. I didn't think maybe they didn't think it was necessary. They had an MO. They were conquering the entire world, culturally and physically. So, if it wasn't necessary. They felt it wasn't necessary. So they could beat it out of us. They thought. Another question. Yes, almost.
It's very interesting what you say about that Judaism can kind of like get together with the Greek philosophy, or there's a lot of gods like Zeus and a lot of those things.
Right.
How all of that can be is very interesting, because I always thought you shouldn't at all.
Of course, idolatry is 100% forbidden. No question about it. It's very right.
Different.
Right. No, this is a battle.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about the cultural differences between Judaism and Greece. But it's it's more complicated. It's like today, right? Why is this so important? Because we're all trying to get messages for today, and so some rabbis would look at me and say that I'm not worthy to teach because I have the first degree and a second degree. And I studied in the university, and like that's secular knowledge. It's not important. I should be only studying Torah and teaching you Torah true. Sorry.
Doesn't that go against what Maimonides taught us, that we should have both science and Tanakh?
Well, there you go. So
Rambam.
there's different approaches. There's different approaches to how to incorporate science, how to incorporate philosophy. In the day was the science. There was no clear division like nowadays. We have the more materialistic science is clearly like a field of study, which is empirical. Well, in those days, there was no major difference between the scientific method. It really hadn't come into its own until a couple of hundred years ago. So in those days, the astronomy and the philosophy and the medicine, it was all part of philosophy. So it's the same questions we have today, the same debates we have today. But what can you take from today we call it secular society? But of course, that's an extension of the Greek world, the Greek culture, which and Roman and the development of other cultures other than purely what Judaism has to teach us, and it's complicated. It was complicated then. It's complicated now, and there's some people that do get involved in secular society and in Western civilization, and they're pulled away from the Jewish values that the Torah teaches us. So it's a tricky business. So I understand those rabbis say, let's just be absolute, black and white. It's just we'll learn Torah, and let them build the bridges and develop the biology and the medicines, and we'll take the medicines. But as so mentioned here, Maimonides didn't present Judaism that way. He said that, and he's not the only one. Of course, famously, the Gra, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna, he wrote a book on mathematics, and even throughout the ages, the Jewish scholars were also amazing at science. Many were doctors, astronomers of fame, and so we never really made that. I mean, there were some rabbis that didn't get involved in mixing or in studying science.
Like the Ramban.
Oh, he was a doctor too.
Was he?
Yeah, that's right. But there's many different subcategories to this discussion, right? Philosophy, particular, is a very subcategory. But the concept of being wise to the world, being knowledgeable about the physical world, the material world, that was not foreign to Jews throughout the centuries. Even though we had trouble with it during the Hellenistic period, we never closed our doors and studied only Torah. I mean, of course, there were some rabbis that did that, but to this day, it's a debate. Some rabbis prefer just put your nose down to the books, study our tradition. We don't need anything from anywhere else. And other people say God wants us to be broader and to develop the world at the same time as we also be Torah scholars. What is the YU Yeshiva University? It's a yeshiva and a university. And what's their motto, their slogan? Torah Umada. Torah and science. So,
And what?
Science.
Like Machon Meir.
Machon Lev is in Israel. It's a institute it's a yeshiva, and it's also an institute of technology. They teach electro-optics, engineering, and computer science, and even now they have business schools. But yeah, that's it's sort of like an Israeli style type of YU, Yeshiva University.
So
Yeah, I'll take questions. Yeah,
this Alexander the Great person, was he of the Ptolemaic Greeks or the Seleucid Greeks?
he was
This
before they divided.
This is
He was
Alexander
the empire. Alexander had 3 generals under him: Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Antigonus.
Antigonus. Was there ever an Antigonaic Greeks? Whatever they're called.
Not in the context of Eretz Israel.
Okay.
Not in the context of Eretz Israel. These two are the ones who fought each other for control of the land of Israel. And as I said, from 333 till year 198, so that's 132 years, the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Egyptian Greeks, they had the control of the land of Israel. And only in minus 198 did it says in the footnote number 2 on page 224, only then did the Seleucid dynasty conquer the land of Israel, and eventually his son, Antiochus' son, took over, and he was the evil one, which enacted the decrees in year 176 to 164. So essentially the filing, the story of the purifying of the temple, according to the dates he's using here on page 225, he says it was in 165 BCC. So when you figure from 333 to 165, it's about 160 years before we actually had the Chanukah fight and the battle where they purified the temple. And then, of course, it's more complicated because the temple was reconquered after that by the Greek armies, and only afterwards, by some sort of political and military maneuvers, did the descendants of Yehuda, the Maccabee, able to regain control over Jerusalem and ultimately over larger and larger parts of the land of Israel. All this, though, is considered to be, by the Rambam, 200 years, because if you start from 165 BCE and you go to 70 CE, which we all know when the temple was destroyed, essentially count that as over 200 years of Jewish sovereignty. Not uniform, definitely not uniform. But okay, other questions? Yeah.
How long was the decree to read and study and keep the mitzvot?
It says here, we don't know. I don't know. The evil decree started sometime in the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes, which was from 176. And if the purification came in 165, so maybe it was 8 years. I don't know. Or 11 years. But then it says here on page 225 that the Greeks returned to Eretz Yisrael in greater numbers, conquered Jerusalem, put Hellenized Kohanim in charge of the temple. However, in order to avoid increased tensions with the Jews, they abolished the evil decrees and allowed the Jews to observe the Torah and the mitzvot. So there was various levels of persecution after the Chanukah story in 165. So far, so good. If you read the book of the Maccabees, I encourage you to. We have some copies here. There must be some. And if anybody wants to find them, we also have books about Chanukah. There's a great book here about Jewish history where it talks about Second Temple period history. Where is it now? I can't see it right now.
You
But I'll
only
find
find
it
it
for
when
you.
you're not looking for it.
Exactly. So I won't look for it anymore, and then I'll find it. And
But nowadays
It
you're
was
playing
here.
these games.
it was here, but it's not now.
What's it called?
It's an art scroll book about the Second Temple times. I forget what its name is.
I think in the past few years they've excavated part of the Accra in the Gavassi parking lot.
Amazing.
You
Yeah.
can see like one of the walls of it, and I think they had like a glacis ramp, kind of like a smooth ramp. But they said that back whenever they were excavating, kind of what's thought to be David's palace, like they had a ramp just like it, kind of overlaying that big step structure, and so it was some massive fortress.
It's amazing what they're doing and uncovering a lot of stuff near the old city there. Fascinating stuff, and we'll take you for a tour there. We usually go once a year. It's amazing to see. You can actually see the structures from this time, and even from before, from King David's time, right? So, okay. So moving ahead, if you want to learn more details of the backs and forth, you can see footnote 3, page 225 and 226. The Hasmonean dynasty. Just a little more history, and then we'll get into the laws of Chanukah more directly tomorrow. The Hasmonean dynasty, I mentioned the Rambam makes a big deal that this was Jewish sovereignty, but there was still Hellenism. There was the conflict between the different sects. There were different sects, Jewish sects, who didn't agree with the rabbis. We found their writings in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Dead Sea, and in other places as well. But and then there was another group. There was another group of. They're called the Idumeans, or in Hebrew they're called the Edomites. They're not the original Edomites from the biblical times. We talk about this week's Parsha, Esav and Edom. There's different, the kings who ruled over Edom before the kings of Israel. This is already Second Temple period. This is 500 years later, so it's probably not the same group. But there was a group who came to the land of Israel and tried to join the Jewish people, and the sages converted a large group of them. And Herod's father was one of this group, Antipater. It says in the footnote number 228. Herod is, of course, famous because, as you can see on page 228, about 20 lines from the end, it says, in the course of time, Antipater the Idumean, a loyalist to Hyrcanus, established ties with the Romans and became their trusted ally, eventually taking control of Judea. So his father, this Idumean, he came in and he pretty much tried to unseat the Hasmonean descendants, the descendants of the Hasmonean rule. And he killed them all off. And he defeated the Jewish leader at the time. Who they took on Greek names, by the way, and all these Jewish leaders had Greek names, Antigonos and Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. There was a civil war which ultimately brought the destruction, because they brought the Roman influence to solve the fights between themselves. The famous fight between the brothers Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, and they asked Pompey to come in, so he came in, and instead of mediating, he just he took over. And
Smart guy.
And so this is a message for us until today as well. Be careful not to let our infighting turn into civil war, because ultimately that's the road to our downfall. If we want the state of Israel, we're so excited. It's only been 72 years, almost, right? That's not a long time in the course of history. So we hope it'll be the state of Israel forever. But if we're not careful and we fight between ourselves, ultimately that's the greatest danger. That was what destroyed the Hasmonean kingdom, and they invited the Romans in to keep the peace, as it were, and they just took over and stopped Jewish rule.
Who wouldn't?
If you watch the
Golden opportunity.
Sorry?
if you watch the Knesset, they
Dangerous. Yeah.
they actually don't agree with the other. So
Of course, but there's a way to
Very
disagree.
dangerous.
There's a way to disagree. There's a way to, still, I think most
they
people
fight like
believe in keeping the laws of the state, and nobody's, overthrowing the other and making a violent coup.
but
This is not
it's
Venezuela,
wild.
right? We're not.
They
Baruch
are
Hashem.
wild. They are very wild.
It's dangerous. It's dangerous to have civil war, and we have to make sure that we keep our senses and keep whatever arguments we have in check. So it shouldn't get out of control. That's something to learn from that. In any case, eventually Herod was the son of this Antipater, and he married Miriam. Miriam was the last of the remaining Hasmonean line.
Right.
So he claimed that was one way. Also, they were converts, so they claimed to be Jewish. And now he married into the royal family, into the Hasmonean family.
And
Like
killed all the
Miriam.
rest of them.
So they were right. They killed all the rest and said, "So Miriam." So that's right. You saw this in the Talmudic dictum. It says anyone who claims to be from the Hasmonean line today is either a slave, because he comes from the Idumeans. They were slaves at first, and they became converts. But so you're either calling yourself a slave or you're a liar and you're lying. So there's no more Hasmoneans anymore. And basically Herod took over. Herod
was Jew, right?
A Jewish
was,
son of
Jewish
converts.
and Roman.
Yeah, Jewish, and he became close with the Romans, and he
I'm
got
confused.
control of the land of Israel from the Romans. But he was quite a tyrant. He was quite a tyrant.
Yeah.
But he beautified the temple.
He made beautiful structures in the land of Israel. He was a master builder. He built famously. Which structures do you know of? Masada
His palace.
was one of his
Herodion?
palaces. There's
Where's
another
his
palace
palace
in
located?
Jericho called
Herodion?
Kiprus. Kiprus is a palace near Jericho. Looks exactly like the Herodian. Very good. It's near Jericho. And famously, what building?
The building became Machpelah.
That's right. Marat Machpelah. He had a trademark stone. It's called Herodian stone, where it has this frame. Right? The stones of the Kotel are built in that. Because that the whole structure of the Temple Mount was rebuilt by King Herod. Of course, he was a tyrant, and the people who built them were Jewish
Slaves.
slave laborers, essentially, who were forced to, pay heavy taxes, including to work as slave laborers. So And he killed, of course. He was what's it called? Paranoid.
Oh yeah.
He killed his own family because he thought that they were trying to plot against him. He built one of the palaces. I used to live by that palace. Now I live by the other palace. The palace I used to live by, I had a beautiful view of Kyprus. It was called, named after his mother. His mother was Kyprus. I always think of that, and I would tell my mother with a wink. Says, "Isn't this beautiful? What a son! He named the palace after his mother." Of course, I didn't tell her the end of the story.
He killed his mother.
He killed her. He killed her and all of his sisters because he thought they were plotting against him, whatever. So, I didn't tell that to my mother. But anyways, it's now I live near the Herodian. It's called. It's a palace that, in the desert, near just south of Jerusalem, where I live, and that's where they found his grave as well. And now they renovated one of the. He made a theater to watch plays with the Roman officials, which came over from Rome, and he impressed them with the, frescoes, and it's a really amazing structure. Basically, it's a man-made mountain. So he was a tremendously successful builder, but probably a horrible person. And but he did build up the land of Israel, so we have some debt to him. Yes, you've been waiting, Hirsch.
So, King Herod's
go ahead.
mother, she was an Nabatean, right?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. Don't know. You have a question right now?
You live close to Herodian.
Herodian.
They finished the stairs to build. They were building like.
Well, they uncovered the original stairs from the
uncovered.
palace.
They finished?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I haven't been. They opened it. They have like mapping on the walls, like to reconstruct beyond where the frescoes. Actually found the original paint from 2,000 years ago. It's amazing.
I was there a few times, and I want to see
The next version, right? I haven't seen. They renovated. They just opened it a couple months ago. I would love to see it. Yeah, take you guys one day. I have to talk to Rav Listman about that. Yes, sir.
And Miriam from the Hasmonean dynasty is a Jew going all the way back.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. Herod, as I said, was complicated. The sages, part of the Megillat Tanit, which we started with, this list of holidays. They made a holiday when he died. So he wasn't a great favorite of the rabbis because he killed them all off. Obviously, we don't celebrate that festival anymore. But we're going to cap it our history lesson at that. And we're going to move on to talk about the battle of the Spirit, which is primarily what we celebrate on Chanukah. Bezrat Hashem tomorrow. We'll continue from page 229 and finish off chapter 11. And Bezrat Hashem we'll go through more of the Chanukah halachot. But I find it fascinating and important to know your history, to know who's who, especially the Second Temple period, which oftentimes we call it the Golden Age of Judaism, because really that's the foundational period for all of our sages and all the Mishnah and the Talmud, which was developed at that time, and afterwards it was written down. But the sages at that time really formulated the structure, the frameworks of everything that we do today. So it's really important to know also the history, to know what we're celebrating. So, to be continued, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, stop here.
Thank you.